Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Jamie Schwartzman. He is the Chief Creative Strategist and founder of Flux Branding, a premier branding agency with over 25 years of experience transforming businesses. Passionate about crafting authentic brand stories that achieve growth, Jamie believes that change is the only constant. He and his team at Flux Branding continue to inspire and lead brands to embrace change, think strategically, and communicate boldly. And fun fact, Jamie's expertise was featured on Gordon Ramsay's TV show Food Stars, where he appeared as an expert brand strategist coaching the winning contestant for the grand prize. So that's kind of interesting too. Welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast, Jamie.
Thanks for having me, Andrea.
Give us a little bit more about what happened. How did you get involved with that Gordon Ramsay show?
Well, listen, we're a studio in Los Angeles and we get all kinds of calls. And this was a call that came in from a TV producer that was looking to do something. And it was a series of calls that escalated up and they finally revealed that it was Gordon Ramsay. So it was a very interesting experience. The shoot was large. I would say there must have been 300 or 400 people on set the day that we went down there. So a lot of activity. They gave me a dressing room, makeup, wardrobe, the whole thing. It was great.
What a
Um,
ride.
it was great. And we had the opportunity really to learn about the brand. He was a really interesting food producer. We prepared an interview. We did an on-camera brand assessment with him and coached him through, and he ended up winning the grand prize.
Oh, that's so cool. That was really cool. I'm going to have to check that out.
What's interesting about it, though, was the amount of time that occurred between the time that we actually recorded the episode and when it was released. And, all that information is embargoed. So I think I had always thought with this kind of TV, like reality TV, that it was all happening in real time. I would say it's not. It was over a year between the dates when we actually did the filming and when this was released. And we were hoping to be able to use it, talk about it, but we couldn't. So very interesting how it all unfolds.
That is interesting. Being in LA, I'm sure there's all kinds of interesting things that you see and get to be privy to. But I also recognize that this has been just a really incredibly difficult few weeks in LA. And I just wanted to, first of all, share condolences for just the terrible experience I'm sure that it's been. And I'm wondering how you're doing. How are you doing? How are people doing?
Well, it's been a really challenging time. Our residence is in Mandeville Canyon, which is right near the Palisades. My kids went to Palisades High School.
Oh, wow.
And you kind of can't really imagine the amount of devastation that's occurred. We were evacuated out of the house for about 2 weeks. And
Really?
what I will tell you is it burned right up to the backyard. And first responders, the city's response, the CAL FIRE, LAPD, the response was incredible. Everything was well coordinated. Everything was, I would say, heroic efforts. Our house was spared, was saved, no damages, but a lot of cleanup of ash, a lot of debris, and so many of our friends lost everything. So it's a weird time in LA. My sense though is that the vibe and the energy, the spirit's pretty good. There was a great concert last night that Live Nation put on that really sort of captured its spirit. So I would say, LA strong.
Wow. I mean, Jamie, the fire burned right up to your backyard. That's just, how do you, I mean, I know this is not a branding question, it's just a human question, but how do you kind of handle that? How do you cope with the fact that it was so close and yet, I mean, there's just so much.
Well, I think for me, it's was sort of a lesson in acceptance and understanding that, I just don't have control over everything in the world and in the universe. And really just getting to the point where, sure, if we'd lost the home, we would have lost some stuff, we would have lost things, but, we still have our memories. And I don't know, I think I just got to a point where we're watching the fires come over the ridge and just realizing that it's now up to the universe. We'll see what happens, and we were ready to accept whatever outcome occurred.
Hmm. Wow. And what was it like being away for 2 weeks, not knowing what was going to happen?
Well, fortunately, there's a great community in Los Angeles. We were hosted by some friends. We got to, play aunt and uncle to their kids. And I would say it turned out to be a really interesting experience of being out of the house and, learning to adapt, learning to deal. And, ultimately, this is all about change, which is
Yeah.
the nature of our agency. We're called Flux Branding for a reason because, I believe that change really is the only constant.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's such an interesting segue too into what we're talking about, because that's part of what I really was interested in talking to you about, is this idea of change and shaping the future, being a part of like taking initiative and making things, not that we have control, as you mentioned before, but that we can have an influence. And so I'm wondering, when you named the company, I mean, it was 25 years ago that you named the company then. So what was the impetus for that at the time?
Well, it's funny. It was a saying that my mother used to say. And
Huh.
she used to say to me, Jamie, the only constant is change. And I would say I really didn't like hearing that. I wanted permanence. I wanted things to be stable. And I wanted, I kind of fought against change. And I realized it was a futile battle, right? The change is going to happen. And so when we named the agency, it was all about change because typically when we do branding, it's during a time of change. Like something is not the same. It may be merger acquisition has just occurred. There could have been a change in the leadership. Executive leadership team has changed. Maybe it's just launching a new product or service. Maybe it's a competitive attack. But there's something that's not going, that's not, it's like it's not normal. Things are changing. And I think for us, we look at change as like there's power in change. And if we can harness the power of change, then there's opportunities to use it as a means of propulsion.
Yeah, that's really good. There's obviously, we're headed into this incredibly, I mean, just deeper and deeper into this very fast moving change with technology. And what is your take on that? And when you see things the way that things are moving, how are you thinking about that as a leader? How are you thinking about that in terms of how to lead other companies through that kind of change as well?
Well, I write about it, and so I publish an essay every month on the topic and about change. And we really have entered an era of dramatic change. Generational shift is occurring right now. I believe it is being fueled by technology because the ability to target and message has never been easier and lower cost. I think really because of the limitations or the, I would say the lack of law in this area, it's now really become down to the ethics and morals of us in communications. And I think there's a lot of ethics and morals, they vary, right? There is no absolute truth there. So, I have my way of operating, but it's not the way everybody operates. So I think it really is for us as communications professionals, it's really important to be conscious of the ethics and morals that we're going to use and to understand that these tactics can be used like it's so easy to manipulate and coerce people right now.
Yeah.
So that now it's really for us, the experts who are in communications to kind of decide what's okay and what's not okay
Yeah.
because it's the Wild West out there.
What are some of the key things that you're thinking about when you're crafting a message, or that you recommend that people think about when they're crafting a message to stay true to that, to make sure that they're not being coercive, because it's so tempting, even if you don't even know what that means. Like, what should people be thinking about?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with the brand,
Mm.
right? And so I think this is where, understanding and having some literacy and knowing what brand is all about is so important. And this is something that's been difficult. I've been doing branding for 25 years. 25 years ago, I would say the general awareness and understanding of brand was very different than it was today. So I've had to do a lot of conversations with executives so that they can understand it. I think there's a lot of confusion between branding and marketing, and there's a lot of confusion between branding and graphic design.
Yeah.
So the way I'll break it down here is I think brand is about sort of the feel and about the vibe and about the spirit, right? How do we feel about that particular company? What's the general consensus? And it's not just what do customers think, but what do our employees think? What do our competitors think? How is that understood? And that's in some ways kind of a spiritual undertaking, right? Finding who we are, what our identity is. And so I think that like morals and ethics are going to start from identity. What are the core values that we decide are, the rule set that are going to be our guiding principles for who we are and how we're going to act? I mean, look, for me, Jamie, you can see me like here I am today, with you. I'm dressed for business, but I might also meet you on the weekend out sailing, right? I look different, but you still know it's Jamie because I'm the same guy. And I would say that's what brands are all about. Brands are going to look different, they're going to sound different, different people working on them, but how do you get some kind of uniformity so that there's a common thread, a common feeling?
Mm. And that I would assume extends beyond what's being portrayed to other people, like the outside. How does that identity how do you incorporate that or tie the gap between the two of culture and brand?
Well, it's interesting. When we get a new inquiry in the studio, there are a couple of different general objectives that the client's looking for. And it's not always sales and revenue, right? In many cases, it's about how do we create unity? How do we get, CEO will call me. How do I get my team firing better? How do I get people aligned? And, that sense of unity is something that brand can do on the internal side. So I think brand is create spirit, right? And highly spirited organizations tend to be more effective, right?
Mm.
Spirited organizations, the people, their hearts and souls are in the game. They are, they pledge allegiance every time they take out their business card. And that is something that happens from feeling, right? So in some cases, it's about the internal side of branding, which is really super important, particularly from a performance standpoint. And then on the flip side, it has to do with building customer loyalty, with developing awareness, becoming unique and differentiating yourself within the marketplace. So it's a broad area, it's a broad category, which is why it's a pretty complex practice.
Mm. Right. So then when people are coming to you and a company comes to you and is going through a change, they're wanting to make a shift in their brand, or they are recognizing a shift in their brand and they need help defining it or whatever, what is the general process, if you don't mind sharing, or the things that you're looking at when you
Yeah, sure.
do that?
So there are best practices for doing this. We've taken them and developed our own practice, and we've a branded approach to this so that it's easy to explain. I explain it a lot, and I have to talk people through it. So we've developed something we call the IDEA method. It's IDEA. Those are the steps: ignite, distill, energize, activate. And they're really the four steps of doing branding, and this follows best practices. So I'll just kind of walk you through these four steps quickly right now. And there's a lot of detail, so I'm going to keep it high level for this conversation. During the Ignite, that's really where we're doing discovery. And it starts in that first conversation. Do we have the right chemistry? A lot of that. We're a small studio. We like being a small studio. We don't want to grow, so we're selective about the kinds of work that we take. And we got to make sure it's the right fit. So checking chemistry, checking the personalities and personality fit is really important. And I would say for anybody who's listening to the podcast who's thinking about branding, it's just really important that you have a great sense of comfort with any agency that you're going to work with. This is a people business. I mean, I almost think of it as like corporate therapy. And if you were going to go work with a therapist or a psychologist to help you figure out who you are, you got to have the right fit and right chemistry with with that person who's going to help guide you along. So that's the first piece, is establishing fit. Then when we get into the Ignite portion of it, it is about collaboration. We really need to earn the right to speak on behalf of our clients, and that takes some getting to know each other, right? It's a bit of an intimate process. In many cases, we start with a retreat meeting, a facilitated retreat meeting. If we can do it in person, great. We're just finishing a large insurance company. CEO had us take 14 of their executives off-site for a 2-day retreat in Florida, in a hotel where we basically whiteboarded for 2 days, right? To really uncover what's going on there. And it's some of it is about us, about uncovering what's going on. A lot of it too is just about contribution and sort of earning the right to be
Yeah.
part of their team. So those contributions critically important. I think one of the things that some agencies fail is that they have a great idea and they love to like let us figure it out and we'll tell you the answer. I don't think that's how branding works. I think branding is not about us telling them the answer. It's about us discovering kind of what's there, right? So that's, and during Ignite, it's workshops, it's market research. Sometimes we do, qualitative research. Sometimes we do quantitative research, and it just depends on what we have from the standpoint of what the scope and budget is. But that's kind of, and we're looking at competitors, we're looking at things, and a lot of times we'll write a report to show our findings. But that's the first stage of things. It's just like, let's figure it out. What's going on here? What's the current state of things? Where do we want to go? What are the objectives? All that has to be uncovered. And that's Ignite. Then we move into Distill, and Distill is really the brand strategy phase where we come up with our ideas. That's where we name companies. That's where we come up with things like the core values. Think of it as like vision and mission. I would say
Mhm.
the old school way of doing this, but we're doing it in a more natural way and really coming up with the big idea. And the big idea, it's simple. It needs to be simple. It needs to be understandable. That document we write in Distill is called a brand platform. Think of it as the brand Bible. It's not necessarily the graphic design. We're not doing logos right now, but we're just kind of figuring it all out. Like, who are you? What are you? And I will say that those manuals typically turn into training documents for HR
Yeah.
when they're onboarding new people so they can understand what the brand is. So Distill. Then E is Energize. That's where we do visual language. And look, there's so much messages. We're seeing so much stuff out there. Visual language is really important. A picture does paint 1,000 words, and I don't have time to deliver 1,000 words, but I can give you a great picture. And here's the thing, because we've done the strategy and Distill, now the visuals isn't like, just personal preference. Oh, well, I don't like green or, purple. These things now become a strategic way to communicate an idea. So that's Energize. And Energize is not just doing a logo. In many cases, it's an entire identity system and the rules and the guidelines that go with it. For some of the large companies, we do brand portals that spell out what the rules are that can be distributed across multiple countries, across different languages. What's really cool right now is what's going on in AI in this space. So this is allowing people to iterate more and more on the brand. And I would say that AI is having a big impact on tone of voice. We're training AI models now in specific AIs so that they can be utilized by people within the company. And it's really a miraculous technology. In A, Activate, that's where we do essentially we'll call them campaigns, but we're not really a leads gen or a campaigns company. And I would say right now, it's all web. Web is everything. Uh, just the online experience has, I've been doing it 25 years, right? So web was a nice to have, or was maybe we'll do a website. I would say web is everything right now. It is home turf. It's where everybody's going to come to. It's the basis. And so a lot of times we'll start with web now because we know we got to develop our communications really detailed on the web. We've got to figure out every product. We've got to figure out every customer type. We've got to do all that stuff. And then once we have that, it's kind of easy to iterate onto the brochure or do the trade show booth or the fleet or whatever, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So that's the idea method. I'm sorry I ran on so long, but that's the, ignite, distill, energize, activate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's really helpful for people to have an idea of what they should be thinking about and looking for, especially when they're looking for a company to help them with branding, and to know that it's more than just the logo.
Well, it's
Sorry,
a
I laugh because I recognize this.
it's an expertise, right? And I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of, what's happening right now is we're coming up with more and more experts in different small studios that can do things, in one way. And I would say, like, if you look at, Marty Neumeier and the brand gap, he was sort of, I think, one of the kings of this idea is that, really companies need to be quarterbacks. Right. And they need to bring in experts and specialists. And I think, finding a generalist, like a studio that can do everything, I think about it almost like as a doctor, right? I can find a general practitioner on every corner. There's generalists everywhere. But a specialist, I'd jump on a plane, I'd take a flight to go see that specialist. And I think that there's an opportunity right now to connect with specialists. If you can coordinate it, if you've got the management infrastructure, then insource that stuff, get specialists in there. It's, the quality is going to go up. Listen, since the pandemic, we've become a smaller studio.
Hmm.
We used to be a larger studio. We were in downtown LA. We had the reclaimed wood on the wall, the French bulldogs, the coffee, it was great. It was awesome. But since then now we've become a virtual company, so much leaner, much smaller team, and now we're able to use the right kind of talent for the right project.
Mm.
So again, for a big agency, they've got their people, they got to keep them busy. Right, for smaller studio, we can selectively bring in the right kind of designer, the right kind of resource, the right kind of writer who's right for that client. So, and I don't have to keep, they come in when they're needed and they are on other projects afterwards. And I would say also it's allowing me to work with more senior people, right? Because the more senior people, they don't necessarily want to have a job anymore.
Hmm.
So it's really, that's another area that technology has really reshaped the way that, studios can operate right now. And it's pretty exciting.
So I'm curious how collaboration works in your company. Just
Hmm.
that general idea of, building on each other's ideas, not just working in tandem, but working together to build something. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, really good question. It took us a while to get through this because it used to be, we just walk into the studio and we'd hang out, or we'd
Yeah.
go in the conference room and we'd just start whiteboarding. And it was all very kind of, it would just sort of happen when it happened, right? We didn't need to be as planned. Being a virtual studio requires a lot more planning. So I would say that we, had to get more diligent in our project management practice, right? We used to be able to sort of skate through it. We still do, morning team meetings 3 days a week. So we do we call our hot sheet meeting 3 days a week. We use that as a quick time to huddle up. We kind of walk through what's hot. We use a digital management platform. We use a platform called Hive. We like Hive a lot, so check it out. I would say Hive is kind of like if Basecamp and Trello and Jira had a baby, it would be Hive. It's got a little bit of everything going on, and we also like the design and the way it looks. So that is helpful. But I would say I spend a lot of time on video conferences, and I think it's better to be in person, but it ain't compared to a phone call. It's pretty good, right? It's pretty good. The other thing too is that we've really had to shift a lot of our tool set away from files to working in the cloud. This is where Figma's really come in heavy because, pushing around Illustrator files and Photoshop files is just like it's too cumbersome when we're distributed. So when we're working in online, collaborative documents, that's a big change for us too. And that also helps too because we're now working not only in the United States, but we've got, people in we've got people in Italy, we've got people in Argentina, we've got people in the Philippines, we've got people in Tunisia, right? So we're a much larger global company, and so we have to have those documents. But I would say that um, project management in a virtual company is a lot more sophisticated than when we're all in the same room.
Do you think that if you did, for some reason, decide to go back to in person, would you bring any of those things that you've learned about project management? Would any of those practices follow you, do you think?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, I think being in person, we just were able to be a lot sloppier,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it just, when we're virtual and online, those things are magnified because, keeping track of things and it's just a little harder. But yes, certainly. And in a lot of ways too, I think being in person together, there's something that happens. There is a different type of energy. There's a different type of, collaboration, different kind of spirit that occurs that way.
Mm.
I certainly don't miss the traffic. And being in LA, that has put 2 to 3 hours back in my life every day. But I think also I'm a little bit older, so I've had a lot of time in the studio, and I think really for the next gen, they may have missed out on some of that, and I just think that there's some other things that go on in the studio, not just work, right? There's a
Right.
lot of social interactions. There's a lot of just human development that occur there. And so I think that that stuff is really important. And it's something we've always tried to, you know, like I would say as a studio, owner and runner, it's not just about doing the work for the clients. Work has got it done for the clients, but it's also about creating sort of the lifestyle that we want, promoting the values that we want. And, part of our values is really helping people become better people. And that is, we do it online. We also do an offsite meeting. So we have everything is named a day of the year at Flux. So like we have our first Tuesday email comes out on the first Tuesday of the month. We've been doing it for 11 years. Okay. So, by naming it a day of the month, it can't go out late. It can't go out early. It has to go out that day.
A lot of accountability right there.
Yeah. And then we also do a third Friday retreat where we do a day on site, our own retreat where it's a facilitated offsite. Now, this year's third Friday fell right into the fires. So hopefully we will get third Friday in, I guess it will be the second third Friday this year.
Hmm.
There's something else I'd like to kind of help. And this
Sure.
is really something that I've come up with to help people understand branding,
Mhm.
particularly executives. Because a lot of executives don't get it. And they're like, what's my ROI on branding? Right? Where's the ROI? And I would say that, branding and the thinking about branding is a little different than the thinking about marketing, right? In marketing, I think marketing is like if you know anything about accounting, and as a studio owner, you have to learn a little bit about accounting, how to read financial reports. And there's two basic financial reports, right? There's the balance sheet and there's the profit and loss, right? So P&L on the profit and loss, that's where it's like, how much did I spend? How much did I make? And I think a lot of people put ROI there on the balance sheet, right? Okay, so if I invest, $125,000 in my branding, how much is it going to make me this year? And I don't think that is the right way to think about it. I think that branding is more balance sheet, right? What are my assets and what are my liabilities? And, when we do branding, it's almost like a capital investment. This is a durable, valuable deliverable that's going to last for many, many, many years. So it's not really fair, I think, for executives to try to measure what's going on a branding initiative on this year's income. It's going to go for a long time. It's almost like what's the ROI on your house,
Mhm.
right? So you'll know when you sell it. And I would say that there's just general value that's going to spell out in other areas. So I really encourage executives to think of this as a capital expenditure. It's balance sheet thinking. We're creating value here. You've heard of the concept of brand equity. Equity is on the balance sheet. It's not on the P&L. So the other thing that's really kind of important is I think of branding as almost like pre-marketing. Because if the brand is well defined, then marketing has more clear, like a more clear mandate. They know what to do, they know what to say better. And that, helps generate leads that are more likely to close. So, marketing can do a better job generating leads. And then that means that sales, who's getting those leads, are getting leads that are better qualified, that are more likely to close. And so, most of the expense right now in companies is in marketing and sales. They're not really thinking about branding and the impact it can have on those two areas by funding it right. So I think, we're seeing it more and more. Finally, business leaders are starting to understand the value of brand. But this is the value of brand, right? First is you're making a more valuable operation that's more highly spirited, more effective, right? And number two, you're lowering your marketing costs because you're probably generating better leads, and that's gonna pay for the branding right there. And then if the sales team has better leads and can close more, smaller sales team. So I think it's like I always think about it like in seriously like dollar signs, right? I think it's usually like $1 sign for branding, $4 signs for marketing, $25 signs for sales. And I think that, taking some of those dollar signs and putting them back into branding is just a redistribution that actually could reduce the number of dollar signs on the table. I hope that makes
Sure.
sense.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so much like culture, and culture and branding are kind of serve similar purposes in a different, they have I should say they have a similar ability to impact everything, but in a different way.
Yeah. And culture, we're in a big cultural shift time right now.
Yeah.
I think we're a generational shift right now.
Yep.
It's interesting, the last couple of essays on branding that I've written have been about the topic of fear, because I think we're sort of entering a new era of communications where fear is becoming normalized. And listen, fear is a really good motivator. Okay, fear of loss, fear of missing out, fear of the other. There's just a lot of classic ways to escalate messaging using these tactics, and we're seeing it in huge ways right now. Um, and the thing is, it just really works. And that's sort of the sad side of it for me right now. It's like it really works, and I think like even honesty right now is in question. Like, you don't really need to be honest, which I think also kind of makes me sad, right?
Yeah.
Because like the upside from attention by creating some, outrageous accusation or message, right? The upside and attention factor is a lot kind of better than the downside for fact check. Like fact check just doesn't seem to like nobody, I'm not seeing a huge amount of attention towards the results of fact checking. Not like we see the big results of attention towards just claiming.
Well, there's a lot of offense taken with fact checking as well. Like, that's offensive to me that you feel like you have to fact check me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, a lot of this comes down to, classic communications tactics that are well documented, and they just work really well with social media and targeted media. And it all comes back to basically the principles of propaganda, right? And Edward Bernays, he's of course, the classic author of propaganda. And, if you start to study some of his work, there's some great stuff out there on Edward Bernays, and he's really interesting stories about him. Um, but if you look at that stuff, you see the simplicity of the tactics of propaganda, and they're just really effective when you can do narrow casting.
So, how do you? I mean, do you take a neutral position with companies, or on this topic of fear and utilizing tactics like that, Or are you specific about, well, we don't work with companies that want to do that? Or how do you manage that as a company?
We are. I mean, I think this is again comes back to our brand, right?
Mhm.
And that, we have, one of our core values is aspire to inspire, right? And so, we have five core principles, core values for our brand. Aspire to inspire is like, we just believe that when people are inspired and they're turned on, that it is, I don't know, it's like there's a chain reaction that occurs, right? When somebody's inspired, they're then inspired to inspire others. So I think that that's, it's funny. It's like we're in this pendulum swing, right? Where the pendulum is swinging so wide. And, that's the thing is, I guess maybe if you think about it from the standpoint of physics, right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so I think, while we have this, crazy swing, towards fear, we also have this amazing sort of movement of hope and art and music and culture. And I think the creative, all the creative aspect of humanity is kind of thriving right now, even while we're seeing all of this, sort of scary stuff. So I don't know. For me, I think I just got to focus. I'm an optimist at heart, and I think that that is important. And so what do I recommend to my clients? Yeah, I focus on the light, right? If we're going to use fear, we'll use it cautiously and responsibly, because I think it does. An example would be we do a lot of work in real estate.
Mm.
Okay, do a lot of multifamily stuff, luxury high-rise residences. And we do kind of want people when they come and see that place, we want them to think like, man, this looks really good to me and it's going to look good to the next person. And I don't want to miss out on it, so I better act. So I would say that kind of like fear of missing out or fear of loss, I feel in that particular context is like I'm okay with that, right? But we don't go hard on it, but we do it by, making places look really attractive, right? Really trying to explain what's going on, trying to encourage a harmonious community of people that are like-minded and think together and that can live together and work together. And so I think naturally then the reaction is like, well, I don't want to lose out on this. So a little bit of fear is okay. I mean, I feel like fear is it's an important human emotion. It's what keeps us safe. But, I just don't want to be putting people into flight or fight mode.
There's a difference between being realistic about something and that there might be fear involved with that. Like there actually might be somebody that would come right in behind you and buy this place versus drumming it up, you know?
Mhm. Or for, maybe another kind of product, a packaged product, right? I want to try it. Everybody else has tried it. I want to try it too. We just got a new client in. They're in the aquaculture business, and they're basically farming salmon,
Hmm.
sustainably farmed salmon, and they have a difference. So in this case, we're going to create a brand that is for a new brand of salmon. Okay, so think about this in terms of maybe like a Jadori chicken or Duroc pork or other places where like the producer and the producer is, and maybe even if you were to think about like oat milk, Oatly, is sort of the one that seems to have the brand that has the highest level of attraction. So these are what we'll try to do, but I would say a little bit of FOMO is good in there. Like we want people to check things out. We want to try things. And so there's some healthy aspects of fear too.
One other question that came to mind when you were sharing was how does how does a company know when it's time to rebrand?
Typically we look at five different things, okay, on it. And whenever I'm taking a new call from a client, so when we take a new call from a client, I have a structured interview process, and I'm kind of listening for one of five things, right? The first is there been some kind of a change in market share? Like, how are we losing market share? And are we if we're losing market share, that means somebody else has come in and is starting to eat our lunch. And why is that happening? Is it just pricing? Is it something else going on? What is it about the brand? Because brand transcends price, right? So that's number one. Number two, has there been merger or acquisition? So in a lot of cases, equity will buy a couple of companies, put them all together in a room and say, play nice. But they're still hanging on to their old business cards. So that's number two. Number three is we're launching a new product or service. So we need to rebalance the portfolio and kind of figure it all out. The next one is just like, we just need to build spirit. Maybe we're not able to retain our people. We're not recruiting good people, and we need a good brand so that like people want to be here, right? Number five for us is startup. We don't do a lot of startups. I just find that I think working with startups is a different mindset, right? And we tend to work more with companies that have, professional management. It's not necessarily the owner's money on the line. It's just they make decisions in a different way. And so those are kind of the five things.
Hmm, that's interesting. And this has been a very interesting conversation, very full of information. I really appreciate it. I'm wondering how people can find you, Jamie, and your business if you're wanting them to check you out. What should they be looking for?
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, you can just Google me, Google Jamie Schwartzman. I'm the only one out there. I'm maybe not the only one. Actually, I do know another Jamie Schwartzman. So, but I'll come up there and you'll find me. If you go to our website at fluxbranding.com, we have a really cool tool. It's this brand personality decoder. You'll see a little yellow button up there. Click the button, you answer 6 questions, and it will calculate a brand personality for you. It's based on archetypes, and it's kind of cool. It's one of 4 brands. If you put in your email, we'll even email you out like a cool report with the answers and an analysis.
That's cool.
And then also for bigger companies that are, investing in their brand, we do this thing called a brand blueprint. And the brand blueprint kind of is an intake call with me. We generate then a report with a gap analysis, what the objectives are, what the intentions are, and begin to sort of give a sense of, okay, so what do we think is needed to cross the gap and get from now to next? And for anybody who's listening to the podcast who'd like that, if you send me an email, just send me an email. It's jamie@fluxbranding.com. That's JAMIE at FLUXBRAND.com.
ING
Oh, Flux Branding.
branding.
Thank you very much. And if you put the name of this podcast in the subject line, I'll know that you came to me that way and I'll get right back to you. So just send me an email. I'm happy to talk to you and either do a blueprint or just have a quick chat.
Great. So I have one more question for you, but even before I ask that, I just want to say again that there's so many well wishes that I have toward you and toward LA in general. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to share about that situation? And
Well, I mean, LA is a great place. It's an amazing city. We have amazing weather, and we have great food. We have great art. We have great people. It's just a really great city. And sometimes it's like we get complacent, with just the everyday and dealing with the traffic and dealing with, all the issues of it. But then, when a tragedy like this happens, it's like a time to refocus and re-see sort of the brand of LA. And interestingly, we've worked a little bit on the brand of LA, which has been pretty fun to do. LA it's a place to, seek answers. People come to LA to find themselves. People come to LA. A lot of people, their dream is to come to California, come to LA. And it's all here. It's still here. Okay. The beaches are still here. There's an energy, there's a vibe in California that's a little different than the rest of the country, I think. And I think it's a place where you can do whatever, right? There's no rules, right? You can make your own rules. So, if you're ever in LA and want to connect with me, I'd love to do that. I love LA. And I think what we're going to see now is just a big boom in the building economy in LA. A lot of money is going to get dumped into rebuilding right now. Currently, we're all navigating insurance. I've
Okay.
got my claim with FEMA and with the California Fair Plan, and everything's getting rethought. So it's interesting because I think this is a time of rethinking in
Mm.
general. We're seeing rethinking at the federal government. Like I haven't ever seen this kind of level of rethought. So in some cases I agree with it, in some cases I don't. But it's change, right? The only constant is change, and so we're certainly in a time of change. And I don't know, I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. I think we're going to enter, I think the best is yet to come.
What one last piece of advice would you want to give somebody who would like to be a voice of influence?
Well, I think you gotta craft your ideas and put them into an understandable framework. So, we do this for clients all the time as part of developing their brand. We come up with, I call it the methodology. It's like, and really what it comes down to is, okay, so what's your pitch, right? You've heard a couple of mine today, right? We talked about the idea method. We talked about spirit. We talked about balance sheet. These are all, different little things that I've done. So I think it helps to write. I think writing them out really helps me. And quite frankly, I think using AI to write is fine. I use a lot of AI to write. I use AI as like my writing assistant. And it's a writing assistant that turns around a draft in 15 seconds. And I don't press a button and get a result from it, but I find if I just sort of stream a consciousness out into the AI, it kind of helps organize those things and put them together in a way that's understandable. So I think if you want to be a voice of influence, it's like you got to have something to say. Have something to say and make sure that it's meaningful and that like people care about it and you're making a difference in the world. And I think it's not just about your own personal gain, but start with the other. Like start with trying to do something, like give it away, do something valuable and meaningful for other people. And I think it starts with that.
Jamie, great word. Thank you so much for your time today and for being a voice of influence for our listeners.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Andrea.